So in this video, we're going to talk about how to release serratus posterior superior using SMRT. So we talked in our palpation location video, our anatomy video, about how serratus posterior superior is rarely shortened or tight because of its action, which is to raise the ribs during forced inhalation. We just don't do that enough to really cause tension in that muscle. We have Jen on the table with us, and I don't know if you can see this on camera, but here, this rib cage is moving fairly well on her right side, and I can push on that rib cage and it goes anterior perfectly fine. Here, however, this rib cage is right in my fingers, and there's a little bit of a bulge right here as the tissue kind of pops to the posterior aspect. If I push on this, it goes nowhere. So it's a little bit posterior. This is actually pushing her scapula out into abduction. And again, I don't know if we have a great camera angle of that, but this scapula is sitting a little bit medial toward the spine. And if you notice, I can move it medial more easily. Whereas this scapula does not want to move medial hardly at all, but we can move it lateral really easily. Now we could say that that's a serratus anterior issue. Serratus anterior has taken the scapula and moved it into abduction. But in truth, with Jen, what's happened instead is that these upper ribs have pushed posterior and shifted the scapula out into abduction. That's a very different pattern. We're not going to be able to release that simply by releasing serratus anterior. So we're going to use that rib position to get our release in serratus posterior superior. So I'm going to do this first from across the table. I'm going to come in to her axilla. So I want to be underneath all of this muscle tissue right here. So you want to come into this kind of divot right here between, say, pec and lat, or between lat and the breast tissue, so that you really contact the ribs. What you don't want to do is try and come through the muscle wall. First, you won't get to the rib cage. Second, it's just painful, okay? So we really want to come all the way through there. Then I'm going to reach really high up into her axilla, right up in through there. I'm going to lock in with the side of my fingers. So I'm locking in right here with this side of my little finger, and then I'm going to lift those ribs into a posterior plane and then move them toward her head. So we brought them posterior and superior. We're going to hold that for just a few minutes and see, few seconds, and see what that does. Jen only wishes we were going to hold that for a few minutes. The muscle tension went down substantially, and the ribs actually went down as well. Now we have lower ribs that are moved up into a posterior plane as well. Let's do this from the same side of the table. Let's do it a little bit more broadly. Okay, so from this side, I'm going to come underneath that muscle wall again, okay? So you see me kind of take the back of my hand. I'm really kicked into flexion at the wrist here. I'm going to take that muscle wall and I'm going to pop it up onto the back of my hand. So I'm really contacting the lateral side of the rib cage. From here, I could monitor if I wanted to up through here. I'm going to use the back of my fingers to move the rib cage posterior and toward her head. Now this looks fairly easy. Why would I not just do this all the time? The reason is that right here I'm at about the 4th, 5th, and 6th rib, maybe 5th, 6th, and 7th, depending on the body, depending on how far I can get my hand into the axilla. So that's a little bit low for serratus posterior superior. So that's one thing, right? So this gives us a broad release. Every now and again you release the muscle and you find that just one band is still really tight. Typically that's because one rib is still out of alignment. So if you do it from across the table and you use your fingers instead, you get a more specific release. All right, let's come up through here and check this. This is definitely better, like the tension in the tissue has gone down. The ribs are moving anterior much easier. Let's check her scapulas. Just visually, they're more even. Yeah, this actually moves medial now. This scapula is still a little bit stuck medial, but that's because she needs this medial tissue release, so rhomboids, levator, all of that. So check for that, right? If you have scapulas that are in opposite positions, one might need the tissue along the medial border released, so the rhomboids and levator, while the other one might need serratus posterior superior released. You want to leave the rhomboids alone in that case because they're already too open, they're already too stretched. We really want to just work with the rib cage when the scapula is out into abduction. This one, the scapula is kind of pulled into adduction, so we might need middle trapezius and all those muscles I just mentioned. So look for videos on all of those muscles.